This is the third part of this manhwa. If you haven't seen the previous chapters, I recommend that you do so. The assistant panics and tells the boss that they can't just leave like that. They need him to guide them, and he follows despite the old man ignoring him and continuing to flee without looking back. There we see Janod again with a lot of blisters on his skin, caused by prolonged exposure to the sun. It surprises Kana because despite that, the monster remains on the surface and does not return to the water. The group of villagers prepares to attack, and Kana asks Mao to give her a weapon, preferably one with a long blade. But he ignores her and tells her not to worry because they will take care of it. He tells her he will protect her no matter what happens. She insists that a simple harpoon won't work. But they don't listen to her, and another villager tells her to get out of there. And then they come across Janod diving into the water. They try to keep up with him on land while he swims. And when they see a clear shot, they simultaneously throw their harpoons, which hit the monster head on and force it to dive. They celebrate because they think they have it. But then they see it resurface and head towards the group. Kana shouts at them to retreat, and the villagers do so, but it's too late, and Janod emerges from the water, catching several of them in its jaws, and throwing several others into the air. The monster swallows those it caught in its mouth, and impales those trying to escape with its tentacles, then devours them as well. Mao charges at Janod while screaming for it to die, but it hits him with such force that it breaks his harpoon and sends him flying. Mao sees that the tentacle passed very close to him, but he wasn't the target, and when he turns around, he sees that the elderly villager has been impaled, lifted into the air by Janod. With his last breath, the old man asks Mao for help, but after a few seconds, he dies, just like the other villagers impaled by the monster. This freezes Mao, who, faced with the horrifying scene, wonders what is happening. Slowly, Janod wraps the villager with its tentacles, leaving him helpless, and Mao thinks that it's a demon that a human simply cannot defeat. Janod lifts him to its mouth, about to swallow Mao, while he wonders how they are supposed to kill that thing. Suddenly, Kana appears with a leap and forcefully impales a harpoon into the monster's head with a deadly look. The monster screams and, in pain, releases Mao, who falls far away from it and sees that his savior is Kana. Furious, Janod thrashes from side to side with the girl on its back, dropping the victims and forcing Mao to flee to dodge the bodies. With the harpoon firmly embedded in the monster's flesh, Kana jumps high and performs a somersault. Then she swings the weapon, retrieves it with a mid-air twist, and comes down with even greater force on the monster. Penetrating deeper into its flesh, she uses her weight to tear it apart until the harpoon breaks in half. The girl gracefully lands, sliding on the ground. This leaves Mao completely astonished, as well as the villagers, who also realize that it's Kana. She extends a hand towards Mao and asks for a weapon, to which the villager immediately responds, addressing her as ma'am, and pulls out a pair of daggers that he hands to the harpooner. She examines them for a moment but thinks they won't be useful as the blades are too small to cut deeply. She looks back and sees some villagers taking refuge in a house, so she says she doesn't have time to go home and get her weapon either. Therefore, she orders the villagers to evacuate everyone to the shipwrecked building, and they obey. She also warns them that the monster will use the shadows to move, so anyone who can fight will have to do so in the sunlight. With discipline, the villagers follow her advice. Janod grunts defiantly at the girl and forcefully tears the harpoon from its skin, then throws it away. The girl then reflects that she kept her identity a secret and blended in with the refugees to prevent Union Busan from finding her. She thought she could protect the children if they stayed there. By doing so, she was able to witness the protagonist's growth and raise Lita during the 4 years they were in Port Oasis. We see how she fondly remembers all these events in which she had a lot of fun. Each day was so precious to her that she wished it would continue like that forever. However, as she recalls the first appearances of the monsters, she concludes that it may have been why she turned a blind eye and ignored all the warning signs of their presence. And she realizes she was foolish for doing so because she needed to remember everything she knew about them. And the most important piece of information of all, that the monsters are everywhere. There is no sea without sea monsters. She remembers the protagonist's father when she told him she wanted to become a harpooner no matter what, and that she would kill every single monster in the world. As people flee, she reminds herself that the duty of a harpooner is to protect people from sea monsters, and they risk their lives to protect human settlements. Janod roars furiously, and with her deadly gaze, Kana thinks that she swore to live like this and challenges him to face her. As both of them launch themselves to start their battle, back in the sea, we see the Protagonist's group submarine buried among the ruins. Suddenly, the hatch opens, and we see the three of them quickly emerging to the surface. They come out of the water and remove their helmets, struggling to breathe due to the limited air they had left. Sonya says they made it, and the diver thought he was going to die. But as the diver vomits seawater, the Protagonist looks up. Surprised, he asks what is happening as they come across the devastated and burning port. So the Protagonist believes that Kana and Lita are in danger. The area they arrive in is completely destroyed, and the group says it can't be true. They see that Janod is responsible and say that he emerged to the surface. The Protagonist runs, and after seeing some debris, he calls out to Kana and Lita with a shout. Then he hears the crying of a child, which catches his attention and makes him turn around. He sees a little boy shedding tears over his father's corpse, which then collapses onto him, and this scares the Protagonist. The diver approaches and embraces the boy while telling him to come with him. The Protagonist sees that the father died with his eyes open, so he turns around, distressed, and realizes that the ground is covered with dozens of villagers' corpses. This infuriates him. Then he hears loud sounds in the distance, and upon closer inspection, he spots the monster's tentacles thrashing above the buildings. Sonya points at it and says it's still in the village. Then the Protagonist turns and sees the spike weapon of the harpooners from the watchtower. So he takes it and tears it from its base, then runs off without paying attention to his companions. At that moment, Lita and Kana materialize in his mind, where he pleads for them to be safe. In a scene transition, we see the harpooner dodging an attack from Janod. Then she plunges the daggers into his thick skin, which splatters jets of blood with each strike. The monster tries to hit her, but she leaps to evade it and stops her fall by burying the daggers in the ground. Janod doesn't give up and continues pounding the ground until it crumbles, attacking the girl with all his tentacles at once, and she evades each one with quick movements, until she lies on the ground behind a house to evade him, and he effortlessly pierces through it. Kana stays hidden behind without making a sound. But when Janod checks the other side, he realizes she disappeared. Suddenly, the door of a building is sent flying, and we see Kana hiding behind it. She quickly gets rid of it and uses all her strength to stab the monster's body. And with a swift twist, she tears its flesh as much as possible. However, this doesn't seem to affect Janod, who attacks Kana again, and she has to lay down and roll on the ground to evade it when she realizes that the knife blade broke. The monster approaches again, and she knows she's in danger, but then a flurry of rocks and debris distracts Janod's attention. We see that it's the villagers who climbed onto a building and riddle the monster with whatever they could find, led by Mao. He shouts at the monster to die, but Kana screams in terror for them to retreat. Immediately after, Janod smashes the building with one blow, sending the villagers flying through the air. The girl screams in desperation and calls out to the monster as she runs towards it to capture its attention. She succeeds, and it charges the acid projectiles in its tentacles. When it shoots, they impact very close to her, melting her skin. The pain distracts Kana, so Janod takes advantage and finally manages to hit her so hard that she goes through an entire house before crashing into a pile of rubble. The harpooner is severely injured, and the villagers panic, believing she is dead. But she is barely alive, and Janod approaches her threateningly, ready to devour her. She realizes her knife is broken, and her body feels as if it has been torn apart. But between gasps, she says she can't die there and desperately tells her limbs to move. As Janod lunges to finish her off in front of all the villagers, suddenly, a projectile pierces the monster's neck. Everyone turns in surprise and sees that it's the Protagonist from the top of the house. He angrily shouts at the monster to die and empties the projectiles from his weapon onto it. It hurts him enough for Kana to recover, and the Protagonist manages to retrieve his sword and throw it. The weapon lands near Kana, who grabs it immediately, and with a scream of hatred, she lunges at Janod. Like a whirlwind of slashes, the harpooner slices through the monster's flesh effortlessly, causing it to scream in pain and even spit blood, while she adjusts her stance and inflicts a major wound. Then she uses the gas from her sword to lift herself into the air, and begins to spin, cutting the front part of the monster in half. This surprises the villagers and sends Janod into a panic, as he turns around and tries to flee from her. The villagers realize this, and in desperation, the monster tries to make its way through, destroying everything around it. This surprises the Protagonist and Kana, and the villagers say that it has gone mad. The protagonist says that it won't escape and slides to chase it across the rooftops. Meanwhile, at ground level, Kana catches up to it and tells him to shoot at the water because they need to protect the people, and he says he's got it. People flee towards the wreckage building, and those who are not too terrified try to warn the crowd to stay away from the shadow. Among them, we see Lita, who turns around wondering if Kana is alright. Suddenly, another group appears fleeing from a nearby street, and one of the men tells them to run. Suddenly, Janod appears, destroying the place, causing Lita and the others to panic and run in all directions. Another projectile pierces the monster's neck, and we see it's the protagonist again, who continues to barrage Janod with spikes. He shouts at them to get out of the shadow, but the people are so scared that they just keep running forward. The monster advances, and a couple of children stumble, but just as it is about to devour them, Lita throws herself and pushes them away. In front of the protagonist and Kana's eyes, she is caught by the beast's jaws. The protagonist runs to rescue her, but the girl only manages to say his name once before the monster swallows her, and the protagonist is left in despair. We see Lita falling through Janod's throat, crying and trying to hold on, but she is too slippery, and watches as the light from outside fades away. She is engulfed by the monster's flesh and screams with all her might for the protagonist, who shouts back and fires his weapon to stop it. But the monster doesn't relent and smashes the debris, sending the protagonist flying through the air, who continues shooting as he falls, and as soon as he touches the ground again, he continues his pursuit, shouting for his sister. In his escape, Janod grabs a boat and throws it at the protagonist, but it misses him. But when he looks up, he sees that the monster has thrown more at him, and unable to dodge, they fall on him. Kana arrives at the scene, shouting for the protagonist as Janod moves away, and the protagonist, severely injured with his last moments of consciousness, sees him submerge and disappear into the depths. He then says his sister's name and collapses onto the debris. In the darkness, the protagonist hears baby cries, and then we see a newborn Lita. The protagonist recounts that she was a healthy girl, and it was their mother who gave her the name Lita. We see the whole family, and the baby in her mother's arms. The protagonist tells that the little one cried as if she wanted all the sea monsters to hear her. And we see the young protagonist saying that the monsters will appear if she keeps crying, so he asks his mother to make her stop. But instead, she asks him if he wants to hold her, and she hands her to him. Instantly, Lita smiles and begins to laugh, which brings joy to the protagonist, and he tells his mother to watch her. But then we see his mother's hand fall lifelessly on the bed, and his father crying over her body, which doesn't move and has closed eyes. So the protagonist screams desperately for her, and there he tells that his mother died after giving birth to Lita. Then we see the family on the boat, where Lita plays with her father, but the protagonist remains isolated and with a gloomy expression. His father asks him to watch over his sister while he goes hunting, but annoyed, he asks why he should do it. His father explains that they ran out of food, so he needs to go diving to get more, and it will only be a moment, but the protagonist doesn't respond. So his father tells him that he has to take care of her while he's away, and that he counts on him. Then he dives, saying he'll be back soon. The protagonist recounts that he resented his sister for taking his mother away from him, and we see the girl approaching him with tenderness, but he only pushes her away. This upsets the little one, who then walks away, and the protagonist thinks that his mother would still be alive if his sister wasn't there, if she hadn't been born. When we see Lita dangerously approaching the edge of the boat, and she is teetering on the verge of falling, the protagonist's father emerges from the water and announces his return as he climbs aboard the boat. But he doesn't see the protagonist anywhere. Concerned, he goes inside to look for him, and that's when he finds him sleeping alongside Lita, embracing her tenderly. This moves his father, who approaches and covers them both with a blanket, and the protagonist recounts that little Lita, who resembled their mother so much, was actually too adorable for him. In a scene change, we return to the present, where the protagonist wakes up thinking about his sister. We see him lying in the middle of a room full of other injured people, including Sonia, who is taking care of him and sleeping beside him. Then the protagonist quickly gets up with a distressed look. Sonia tells him that he finally woke up, but then she sees him standing up and staggering, trying to leave. She tells him to wait because he shouldn't move yet. There, the protagonist reflects on all the confidence he gained from training with Kana all that time. He believed that he had become stronger, and we see an occasion where a group of men were bothering Lita. He confronted them single-handedly, and after a tough fight, he managed to defeat them and make them flee. He says that he always wanted to see for himself how strong he had become, We see Lita tending to his wounds from the fight, telling him that now no one wants to get close to her because of him, and if he is being too protective. But he only responds by asking her to let him know if someone is bothering her, and looks at Kana, who is observing them. Then we see the scene where the protagonist told the harpooner that he was ready to fight, but the place was too peaceful, and she asked him if he wanted to prove himself or just show off his strength to others. The protagonist remembers when he killed Janod's offspring and says he thought he was strong enough. He thought he was ready, but he remembers his first encounter with Janod and says that when he saw the monster, he froze and couldn't move. And he became a 12-year-old again, filled with fear and thoughts of fleeing, just like back then. So he knew he hadn't improved at all. The protagonist reaches the entrance of the compound, and the legs of someone in front of him make him raise his gaze. There, we see that it's Kana, dressed in her harpooner gear. Then the protagonist breaks down in tears, saying that he couldn't protect Lita. The girl remains serious, but the protagonist collapses to the ground and repeats over and over that he couldn't do it. But then Kana buries the protagonist's sword in front of him, causing him to look up. The girl then tells him to take his weapon and stand up, and with a dark and intimidating aura, she tells him that they have to tear those monsters apart. We have a panoramic view of the port again, with buildings in ruins, destroyed and stranded ships. Survivors are helping to remove the bodies and assist the injured. The cook, along with others, has prepared a large food stand to feed the refugees. At that moment, a voice from a megaphone interrupts them and tells them not to lose hope. It's the chief, who tells them he will be with them until the end, and they will recover from this no matter what happens. So they must be strong and rebuild. This moves the villagers, who break down in tears and run to embrace the chief to thank him. But then Kana and the protagonist appear among the crowd. The chief runs towards them, thanking Kana for protecting the village and for the great show she put on, when the protagonist stops him and knocks him down with a punch, sending him flying away. Distressed, the villagers ask the protagonist what he's doing and rush to help the chief. They restrain the protagonist and stand between him and the elder when the protagonist shouts that he knew about it from the beginning, that Janod had been under their feet all that time. The villagers are confused and ask him what he's talking about, and that he must wake up, asking why he's doing this to the chief. The chief recovers and says he understands that he wants to blame someone for the loss of his sister, but he has never seen that monster before. However, the protagonist calls him a liar and says that all the missing divers were in Janod's nest. He was feeding the sea monsters with them. The chief insists that he wouldn't be capable of such a thing since he had no way of knowing that Janod existed, and he kneels on the ground, saying he feels unjustly accused. In tears, he asks if he is being accused of being responsible for all the deaths of the missing divers, because his only sin is giving his best to improve the oasis. His attitude continues to move the villagers, who tell the protagonist that it's enough, but he continues to growl when a sharp screech hurts everyone's ears, interrupting the confrontation. Then we see that it came from the village speakers, which start broadcasting the conversation the chief had with his assistant when they were informed that the exploration group's submarine had been out of contact for 3 hours, and how he was sure that the village would forget everything in the 6 months that Janod would remain inactive after devouring the divers. Upon hearing this, the chief is stunned, and with looks of anger and resentment, the villagers turn to look at him, surrounding him. Someone can be heard asking if that's all that was recorded, and someone answers affirmatively. This infuriates the chief. Then we move to his office, where we see the assistant kneeling at Mao and his group's feet. He tells them he never asked for that and pleads for them to let him live, because all he did was pass on messages to the few newcomers the chief chose, telling them about a new diving spot that nobody knew about, all on the chief's orders. Then Mao asks him what he's talking about, and the assistant reveals that the chief was the one who chose who would be sacrificed to Janod, and then he made them forget about that person. At that moment, the protagonist remembers the elder's supposed kindness, how he took an interest in him after seeing how much he had grown, and how welcoming he had been to outsiders. People start exploding in anger, asking if he was feeding Janod with them, as well as questioning him about their missing family members and if their fate was to end like this. Even the cook asks the chief if it's true, while he remains still and silent. Then, with a wicked expression, the chief asks them what would happen if that's the case. Upon hearing it, the protagonist grabs him and lifts him by the neck, calling him a shameless bastard. But the chief asks how he's shameless, and if none of them thought it was strange to have a peaceful place without sea monsters, and that such a place doesn't exist because everything was only possible because the oasis is Janod's territory, and thanks to him, they could go diving in search of the inheritances. He tells them to look at the village and asks if they prefer to fight sea monsters every night instead of the peace they lived in, and if they believe they can live with that terror every day. because the village can only move forward if 1 or 2 divers are sacrificed, and that's how they have been living. However, the cook approaches and tearfully asks what he's talking about, and if he's saying that he sold his son to Janod in exchange for a peaceful life, in addition to whether he thinks he would have wanted that, as his son was only 19 years old, and he recounts that every moment of life without his son was hell. There, people begin to demand the same, that their loved ones were good people and he should return them. The chief argues that he did everything for the village, and they should be grateful to him. But then someone throws a stone at him, leaving a wound on his head, and we see that it's the people telling him to shut up and return their families to them. So everyone begins mercilessly pelting him, saying he should die, while the protagonist and Kana watch the scene coldly. After running out of stones, people resort to sticks, legs, and fists to unleash their rage on the elder, so he crawls away, begging to be saved. He crawls to the feet of Kana and the protagonist, pleading for their help. But the protagonist, furious, tells him that the divers who were dragged into Janod's nest would have wanted to live as much as he did and be home. The chief turns around, frightened as he sees the people approaching, so he apologizes, saying he was wrong. But the protagonist does nothing, and the people continue to approach. The chief then switches to begging Kana for help, but she coldly tells him that instead of taking advantage of the people's desperation for the inheritances and sacrificing them, he should have thought of a way for everyone to survive. So the real monster there is him. Then the old man receives a hard blow to the back of his neck, causing him to collapse, and the furious mob starts beating him again. Suddenly, the chief says that the people who were taken by Janod are still alive. This surprises the people, and the protagonist steps forward to stop them. And he lifts the chief, asking him what he means by saying they are still alive. There, the old man explains that Janod doesn't immediately eat its prey. Instead, it takes them to a kind of food storage first, and if they're lucky, they will be there for up to a week. This leaves the protagonist stunned with the possibility that the villagers and Lita might still be alive. The people scream and cry, hopeful that the chief's words are true. Another villager accuses him of lying and says he only says it to save himself. But the old man says it's true. Kana approaches him and asks how he knows that, and then the chief reveals that it's because he was the first person to come out alive from Janod's nest. This surprises everyone. The old man then recounts that he was a citizen of Union Hong Kong. Their ship ran aground during a strong typhoon, forcing them to settle and build a village upon the ruins. They survived until one day they were attacked by Janod. However, when they woke up, they found out they hadn't died but were inside the monster's nest. There we see the young chief asking one of his companions if they are okay. Suddenly, something enormous emerges from the water behind him, and when he turns around, he sees a massive tentacle. It nearly grabs the chief, but he manages to avoid it. Instead, it takes one of his companions' bodies and takes it into the water. The chief then explains that Janod not only eats people but also lays its eggs inside a host to breed its offspring. And somewhere in the refuge, it has a cultivation area. We see the diver from the past being taken and swallowed in what appears to be an incubation area full of biological capsules, where people are turning into monsters, and how the chief managed to swim away while the tentacle was distracted looking for more bodies. He says he was the only one who managed to escape that place. This disturbs Kana, as she thinks there are still survivors down there. The protagonist thinks of Lita, so he grabs the chief tightly and asks him where the nest is. The old man just laughs and claims he will tell them if they promise to let him go. However, the protagonist punches him, and Kana tells him that he's not in a position to negotiate, so she will accompany them on the journey to guide them. In a scene change, we see the village preparing to descend. Cranes load a mechanical diving suit. Several submarines are equipped with supplies, equipment, and repairs. There, Mao informs Kana that they have 12 volunteers and that they brought anything that could be useful as a weapon, as she requested. But she asks if it will be enough, to which the girl responds that it will suffice. When one of the villagers arrives to inform her something and shows her a torpedo made with 90% oxygen and gasoline that the engineers made using everything they had. They ask her to shoot it into Janod's mouth for them, and she says she will do it. Meanwhile, another villager approaches the protagonist and gives him harpoons made with venom from the poisonous sea serpent. They are so potent that they should be enough to knock out a whale, so they hope they will be useful against Janod. The protagonist takes them and thanks them, as we see that all the villagers have gathered to give them their belongings, including a dagger that one of them sharpened that morning, and fish and medicines they prepared for them. Then, a trembling woman approaches the protagonist and tearfully begs him to please save her husband. The protagonist tells her he will do what he can, while more villagers tell them that they are counting on them to rescue their loved ones, and they regret not being able to be of more help, so they must return safely. The protagonist runs towards the submarines, and they get ready to depart. The team starts the dive and descends quickly through the well. The crew inside showing serious expressions, determined to kill the monster and rescue their families. Inside one of the submarines, the chief takes stock of the expedition members. It consists of fishermen, a diver, and a mechanic. He says that hunting Janod with that rabble is suicide. But a man responds that they didn't plan on coming back alive anyway, as all they want is for that monster to die, and he will seek revenge no matter what. The old man simply calls him a fool and tells him that he will have a useless death. But the protagonist replies that not everyone in that world is a coward like him, and through gritted teeth, he tells him not to underestimate someone's bravery, especially since he has no right whatsoever to do so. This scares the chief, and he asks him to calm down. However, Sonya thinks he's not wrong because entering a nest of sea monsters with novices is indeed suicide. Moreover, it's not an ordinary monster but one of the 7 demons of the sea, something they can't easily fight, considering that the only people with battle experience are her, Kana, and the protagonists, so the other 9 will only get in their way. There, she notices Kana and realizes from her tattoo that she is a 3-star harpooner. She wonders how the hell she plans to fight Janod with that inadequate group as backup and if they can trust her. At that moment, Kana tells the protagonist to calm down because they need to keep a clear head to think, and then she gently caresses his head, instantly calming the boy. But this triggers jealousy in Sonya, who asks in her mind what the hell she thinks she's doing, and she tells her to get her hands off him. We see the 2 submarines continuing their descent, and they are informed that they are almost there, so they must prepare to dive. As they rise, Sonya takes the opportunity to hit Kana with her arm. The divers put on their equipment, and in his mind, the protagonist encourages Lita and the survivors to stay alive and be very careful. In a scene change, we see the depths of the ruins, and we move through the rubble and pipes to an area where a bunch of bubbles appear on the water's surface, and we see that it's Janod emerging from the water on a concrete platform. The monster contracts its body upwards, and when saliva starts coming out of its mouth, it opens it and regurgitates all the villagers it had swallowed. They fall covered in slime and unconscious onto the platform. Among the pile of bodies, we also see Lita unconscious. The team of divers deploys and starts their journey until the chief tells them they have reached their destination. And that is the entrance to Janod's nest, which is another enormous and deep well. The protagonist thinks it's so deep that he can't even see the bottom. Kana asks a diver if the anchor is set, and he tells her everything is ready, including a pulley system. So, with a murderous look in her eyes, she says it's time. Before descending, Kana warns them that they cannot turn on the flashlights until the fight has begun because the monsters will attack anything that has light. And she orders everyone to be ready in their positions, so the divers hurry. But she tells the chief that she will stay there with her. Kana lights a flare and throws it down the well, and as it descends, we see that it reveals the horde of monsters inside. One of the divers descends afterward and, after reaching a certain depth, turns on the flashlight on his helmet, attracting all the monsters. One of them lunges to devour him and manages to bite his body and trap him with its tentacles. But then we see the diver starting to inflate, and suddenly he explodes, incinerating all the monsters around him. They are also riddled with spikes that were inside him. Suddenly, another flashlight turns on at the entrance of the well, causing the surviving monsters to charge towards it. The diver warns that they are coming, and retreats just as the monsters emerge from the well. However, they fail to escape and we see that they are trapped by thin threads that, when they try to pass through, cut them into pieces. The monsters don't stop and continue trying to climb up, causing more cuts in the process. But they exert so much force that the ropes become too tense and end up breaking, allowing the tide of monsters to finally escape. Then Kana lights another flare and raises it above her head. This attracts the monsters towards her, while the chief asks her what she's doing and if she can't see all of them coming towards them. But she replies that's the point, and just as the monsters are about to reach them, she says they are the bait. Suddenly, we see the monsters captured by a huge net and a mechanical device activates, pulling the net towards itself. Then the protagonist says, "Here they come," and all the divers emerge from the debris. They start riddling the captured monsters with their weapons, while the monsters can't move. Filled with fury, the humans unleash every projectile from their weapons, until the bodies of the monsters start losing shape. From a squirming and trembling mass of flesh, they turn into a pile of inert tentacles. There, we see the divers completely surrounding them, and exhausted from the confrontation, They celebrate that they killed them all. The chief insults them, asking if everyone knew about it except him. Sonya reflects then that they killed them without losing a single person, and wonders if that's the difference between their levels of experience. And she says that Kana, a 3-star harpooner, is a true expert. Then the divers gather around the entrance of the well, and with determined faces, they prepare to enter. In a scene change, we see absolute darkness where a voice calls someone. And when they open their eyes, we see that it's a villager asking Lita to wake up. The villagers are happy that she's alive and ask her how she's feeling. So she gets up and asks where they are, but the villager tells her that none of them know. There, she remembers the moments when she fell into Janod's throat and swears that the monster ate her. The villager tells her that they all thought they were dead too, but when they woke up, they were there. So they believe it was the work of the monster. The villagers cry, relieved that everyone is alive, and say that now they just have to escape, and there should be an exit somewhere in the room. Suddenly, Lita hears a splashing sound, and when she turns around, she realizes it's a massive tentacle, the same one we saw in the chief's memories. It opens up and releases a viscous liquid in front of the girl. The tentacle seems to notice Lita and approaches her, causing her to tremble in terror. But then the villagers scream and start running, wondering what it is. This grabs the attention of the tentacle, which ignores Lita and snatches one of the fleeing villagers. The terrified woman sees her son and he cries out for her. The tentacle then drags her in front of Lita and she tries to grab onto her, but despite coming close, she fails to reach her, and the tentacle carries her away into the depths. Lita stands frozen, and the concerned villagers shout that there's something in the water. They try to move away, but then something else emerges behind them. When they turn around, they see 3 more tentacles capturing the villagers one by one without stopping. Amidst the confusion, the child cries loudly for his mother, and Lita appears and embraces him from behind. She puts her hand over his mouth to prevent him from screaming, while people continue to move and scream around them. Suddenly, the movement petrifies Lita with fear, and the child sees that the people who were screaming and running have now been captured by the tentacles. Both children remain as composed as they can, until silence falls, and Lita opens her eyes, asking if it's over. She looks up and sees the villagers frozen in place. When she looks at what they are seeing, she sees a face similar to Janod's above her. It belongs to a creature similar to Janod but purple in color. Its back is filled with small capsules containing people who are transforming into monsters. The villagers wonder what it is and if it's Janod, but Lita thinks it's not because it looks different, and then the creature pulls the captured villagers into its back. A membrane begins to surround them, and despite their desperate attempts to escape, they cannot. So Lita concludes that it's not Janod, and as she watches, the monster slowly submerges into the water again until it disappears. Terrified, Lita understands that there are 2 of them. In a scene change, we see the tunnels of the ruins, where the protagonist carves a mark on the walls with his dagger. He asks the group why it feels like they are walking in circles. The group continues on their way in search of the nest, but another diver says it's a complete maze. Mao asks the chief if he's sure they are going the right way. The chief tells him to find it himself if he doesn't trust him, but Mao points his weapon at him. He tells him that if they find out he's been lying, he'll skewer his skull with a harpoon. The nervous old man curses in his mind. Suddenly, the protagonist sees something with his flashlight and notices one of the marks he made on the wall. Realizing that they've just been there, he turns angrily towards the chief, accusing him of lying again. The mechanic asks if he did it on purpose, but the old man says he didn't. He says it's not his fault that he doesn't remember something from so many years ago because at that time he was too busy running away to remember the way back. But he assures them that once they get out of that place, he can find it. But the divers don't fall for his trap. Sonya asks Kana what they should do when one of the divers hears a splashing sound coming from one of the tunnels. He points his flashlight in that direction and sees what appears to be a shark fin. When he asks what it is, suddenly the fin starts getting closer to him. The fin turns out to belong to a shark-headed monster that knocks down the diver. It continues its charge until it hits the wall and finds the chief's leg. It bites the leg, causing the old man to scream in pain. The divers open fire at the monster, but it hits Mao with its tentacle, smashing him against the ceiling, just like the mechanic. So Kana and the protagonist draw their swords, and in perfect coordination, they decapitate the creature with a clean cut from their weapons. The severed head falls into the water, splashing water and blood in front of the chief. Its jaws still attempting to bite despite being separated from its body. Mao, tired, wonders what that is. The chief screams in pain from his leg wound and says he can't move, but the mechanic tells him not to exaggerate because nothing is broken. But then something catches the attention of both of them, and when they turn around, they see a horde of shark monsters filling the tunnel in front of them. The divers start shooting, but there are too many, and even though the chief tries to escape, one of the monsters is about to devour him. But the protagonist appears and slices it in half. The protagonist, Kana, and Sonya then take a stand to confront the creatures. Mao prevents the mechanic from shooting and hitting the harpooners. They take the initiative and start killing the monsters with a killer frenzy where heads and limbs fly everywhere. However, Sonya also says that there are too many, and a new wave surprises the fighters. One of the monsters manages to trap the girl. The protagonist worries about her when the tunnel gate closes, cutting off the beast's tentacles and freeing Sonya. This surprises the whole group. On the other side, they hear the monsters banging against the metal, but they can't break through. Breathing heavily, Sonya asks what that was. Mao says the door moved on its own, and Kana asks if anyone touched something, but none of them did. Then they hear footsteps behind them, and when they turn around, they realize it's a pair of children. One of them with her hand on the bracelet on her wrist. Sonya is surprised that they are children, and the protagonist asks them if they were the ones who closed the door. They say yes, and ask back if they are from the outside like Gongti. Upon hearing their companion's name, Sonya runs towards them and asks if he is alive, and they say that she must be his girlfriend, to which she clarifies that she is not. Then they say that they were waiting for them and ask them to come with them. The group is still in shock, so the protagonist asks Kana what to do. She says they should go with them since they seem lost anyway, and she looks at the chief, who looks away, embarrassed. So the children start walking through the tunnel with the group of divers following them. Back in the incubation room, the water remains calm, and the villagers are still alive. One of them trembles in fear because he thought he had survived, but he is still in danger and doesn't want to die. This feeling spreads among all the survivors. The child continues crying for his mother while Lita tries to comfort him, telling him that they will be rescued soon because the protagonist and Kana will definitely come for them. But another villager tells them that it's ridiculous because there's no way they will find them when they don't even know where they are. So it's all over for them. This depresses Lita, who wonders if everyone has already given up. There she remembers that she had felt that kind of despair before, and we see her encounter with the offspring of the monster that killed her father. She recounts that back then the protagonist was scared too, but despite that, he fought until the end. He never gave up, and thanks to that, they managed to survive. Then she sees a metal rod among the debris and wonders if she is capable of that too, if she can fight. When suddenly the villagers scream that the monster has returned, and we see the tentacles emerging from the water again. This freezes Lita and the child, who calls her sister, while the villagers move away as far as possible and say they will all die. Then Lita turns to the child, and with a smile and tears in her eyes, she asks him not to give up. She then stands between the tentacle and him, armed with the metal rod, and she shouts to everyone that they will survive no matter what, which surprises the villagers. The tentacle attacks and captures the girl, lifting her in the air to take her away, but she firmly holds onto the metal rod, and with all her strength, she begins to stab the tentacle multiple times until it is stained with its blood. So it slams her against the concrete, and to make her stop resisting, it knocks her unconscious. Then one of the villagers screams in anger and charges at the tentacle, causing it to release Lita. But then the man falls to the ground, and the tentacle captures him, when another villager appears, lifting a stone, and shouting at the monster to die, and then dropping it onto the tentacle. It lets go of the man and rises in the air, while a thread of blood drips from it. So the old man laughs and asks the monster if that surprised it, which in turn surprises the other villagers. Then the grandfather turns around and shouts at them, asking what they're waiting for, as even the little girl is fighting. Upon hearing this, they regain their morale, so they grab any debris that can serve as a weapon and prepare to fight. One of them tells the boy to stay behind to take care of Lita, while the villagers move forward, and they form a barrier to protect the children from the multiple tentacles that appeared. This moves the little boy and makes him burst into tears. The tentacles rise threateningly against the humans, but they prepare to face them fearlessly. One of them even says it could be their last day, but they will make sure to fill the damn monster with holes before they go. And the tentacles begin their attack, while we see the boy closing his eyes and blood splattering around him. In a scene change, we see the corridors of the shelter, and we are told that what we see happened a few minutes earlier. The protagonist's group walks over some pipes, and there they come across a pile of large abandoned artifacts. But one of the divers tells Mao to stop drooling because they're all empty. There, the group encounters a hatch, and as they open it, they are told they're almost there. The group walks through the newly opened path and is surprised because on the other side they find a room filled with old machinery. Among them are submarines, which Mao realizes are very similar to the ones they use. Then they stop in front of a human-sized door, and when it opens, they see a man sitting in the middle of what appears to be a control room. So Kana asks him who he is. He turns around, and we see that he is an old man armed with a conventional bullet pistol. He tells them he is the director of that shelter named Taishan. He welcomes them to the Matmata shelter and explains that they are the last survivors in the area, and that the Protagonist's group are the first outsiders to come there in a century. This surprises Mao, who asks him if that means they have been there all that time. Taishan starts asking them where they are from and what the outside world is like, when suddenly he thinks about the possibility that they are from Earth, and if it has finally returned. Kana asks him if he means the concrete islands, but excitedly, the old man tells her he means the earth, the dirt, where grass and trees grow. But Mao intervenes between them to push Taishan aside and asks him what he's talking about because the world is covered in water, and there is no land, which Kana confirms, telling him that everything is water, and they come from a village on a concrete island. This causes Taishan to collapse because he had hoped it wasn't like that anymore, just like the children. Then the leader asks him if he really survived the great immersion in that place. But Sonya approaches the boy with desperation and asks him where Gongti is, to which the girl responds by pulling back a curtain, revealing that the unconscious harpooner is behind it. And Sonya runs to him. Taishan explains that he is stable, and although he lost a lot of blood, the injury was not serious, so he should be able to get up soon. The protagonist is relieved that he is safe and hopes that Lita is the same, when suddenly Sonya hits Gongti in the chest and tells him to get up, and then she pulls his hair while yelling at him that they must avenge Jocko. Kana tells Taishan that they need his help because they are there to kill Janod, and the old man is surprised that they call the monster that. So the harpooner asks him if he knows where its nest is. At first, Taishan hesitates because he doesn't think they can kill Janod with those numbers, but he tells them that he knows why they are there and presses a button on the console. It projects on the screen the image of the monster's incubation zone, where the villagers and Lita among them can be seen, and the old man asks them if they want to save those people. This surprises Kana and the protagonist, who sees his sister as well as the divers, who are glad they are alive, and the leader also celebrates because he told them so. The protagonist bursts into tears upon seeing Lita alive, and thanks that it's not too late yet, so he tells her to hold on because he's coming for her. The protagonist turns around in a hurry and asks the old man where it is, and he tells him that he will help them if they are there to kill the monster. In a scene change, we see the submarines that the group arrived in, where the divers who stayed to guard them secure them to the ground with anchors. They finish their work and say they will go back inside to wait for Kana's signal, when a sudden movement catches their attention. They immediately hide and prepare their weapons, wondering what it was, when we see that it's Janod, who approaches the net full of corpses of its offspring, and roars furiously after examining them. The sound is so loud that it damages the divers' ears, and they wonder what Janod is doing there. The monster destroys the net to release its offspring when it notices the presence of the divers and proceeds to devour them as they try to escape. We see the environments inside the shelter that the group passed through, and them crossing a bridge between sections. Mao is surprised because he never imagined there was something like that underwater. There, Taishan tells them that it used to be a city on land, but due to the incessant rain, their ancestors prepared the shelter in anticipation of the immersion, and they built a city in the heights, praying for the rain to stop. It was designed for the underground city to endure even if the upper areas were submerged, and we see people living comfortably inside, while Taishan says it was a paradise where they survived together, while dreaming of the day when the earth would return to what it was. But everything changed when the monster attacked, and we see Janod emerging for the first time in front of humans. Taishan tells that they fought hard, but it wasn't enough, as over time, most of the ammunition became useless because they were wet. And as we see the skulls that the protagonist and Sonya found the first time, the old man recounts that everyone ended up dying because of the monster, and in the blink of an eye, their paradise turned into a hell. In addition, every time they went for provisions, they lost more and more lives because the monsters waited for the search groups and ambushed them, setting traps as if they knew what they were looking for, and they were the ones being hunted in the end. So Taishan asks the group if they are sure they can kill it, to which Mao responds enthusiastically, saying that of course they can because they have Kana with them. Then we see the girl in the control room, opening the door for her grandfather so they can pass. The group exits and prepares to cross another bridge, which we see is in a huge pit where multiple sections connect, where Sonya leans over and is scared because she can't even see the bottom. The protagonist asks the boy, named Noah, how much longer they have to walk and if they can't go faster, and he tells him that they are already there and will soon reach Janod's nest. when suddenly they come across the two submarines tied with the net in the middle of the bridge, and the protagonist shouts that they are their diving companions, so one of the divers approaches to check. And indeed, he finds Changsu and Minju, the two divers who were taking care of the submarines. So he asks what the hell happened and tries to free them when one of them weakly tells him to run. At that moment, Kana feels a chill, so she quickly orders everyone to retreat. But it's too late, and when they look up, they see Janod pouncing on them. And it falls on them, taking half of the bridge with it, including Kana, Noah, and the protagonists. While they are falling, the protagonist manages to hold on to the boy, but they don't stop due to following Janod's figure, who continues to destroy bridges along its path. Now, who managed to stay on the first bridge, screams for Kana and the protagonist, as well as Sonya and Taishan. But then the harpooner detects movement behind her and sees that it's the monster's offspring descending through the pit. So the group retreats inside the tunnel and shoots at those trying to enter. However, there are too many of them, and soon they start gaining ground against the divers. Deep in the pit, we see that the protagonist and Noah manage to fall onto the remains of a bridge. The boy gets up in pain and hears Kana calling him through the radio. He looks around the wreckage and asks her where she is, but she says she is much further below him, and she asks what happened to the others. The protagonist looks up and tells her that he thinks they are way above both of them, and at his level, only he and Noah are present, so Kana says it's a relief. The protagonist tells her to hold on and that he's going to descend, but she simply responds that Lita comes first. We see her bloodied arm as she tells him that she will catch up later, and to go for Lita. The protagonist tries to refuse, but she tells him that there is no time, so he agrees and asks Noah to show him the way. Kana repeats that there is no time, and we see her alone facing Janod, to whom she says that it's time to end this. The battle begins, and the monster wraps its tentacles around the bridge to destroy it, and it starts to detach from its supports, but this doesn't stop Kana. While remembering the good times with Lita, she angrily reproaches Janod for daring to take the girl away from her right in front of her, and she activates the gas on her swords while making a huge leap directly at the monster. She cuts off one of its tentacles, bounces off the wall, and jumps again to land on the beast's back, where the marks she made during the attack on the port are still present, and she takes the opportunity to pierce its flesh, and then perform multiple spins that slice Janod like a saw. She even manages to cut its tongue. As the monster falls, it hits her, and although she manages to block the impact with her weapons, Janod's strength ends up smashing her against the walls of the tunnel. The girl remains buried for a moment, but before she can react, she sees Janod pouncing towards her, so she quickly frees herself from the debris and dodges the attack. She shouts at him to hurry up and fall, and with her whirlwind attack, she cuts off one of the tentacles that the monster was holding on to. This causes it to fall until it is stopped by some bridges. Then Janod charges its acid attack and shoots at Kana, but only manages to hit the bridge she is on. So the girl regains her position, quickly runs towards the edge, and takes advantage of the weakened supports caused by the acid to cut a piece of the bridge. She then strikes it to make it fall with more force, and like a massive harpoon, it pierces through Janod from one side to the other. The monster screams in pain as Kana lands on its head and stabs it with her swords. Finally, they reach the bottom of the tunnel, and Janod is impaled by the debris from the bridges it destroyed during the fall. It continues to roar, and we see Kana slowly walking towards its head, telling it to be quiet. She then cuts its head in half, letting it fall into the void. We see Janod's lifeless corpse, with blood and guts splattered all over the place, and Kana climbing up the tunnel stairs. She reaches the remains of a bridge and leans on it to climb when someone extends a hand to help her. We see that it's Gonti accompanied by the girl, who asks with a determined expression where the others are. Back inside the shelter, the corpses of the monsters pile up endlessly from the battle, with the divers continuing to fight for survival against the relentless beasts. The diver in the mechanical suit finishes off a shark monster when another one appears behind him and bites his head. But the metal is so tough that its teeth break, and the pilot asks mockingly if it's not as soft as expected. He then turns around and shoots it from within. Mao shouts that they're almost done cleaning up there when a tentacle appears from above, wrapping around one of the diver's neck and pulling him up away from his comrades. The diver shouts for them to save him as he enters the monster's mouth, but it closes its jaws and devours him before the others can do anything to help. Mao shouts that it's a damn monster, and they shoot at the ceiling to finish them off. This causes the monsters to lose their grip and fall to the floor, dying. The leader shouts that he knew this would happen, and if they really thought they could save the captives from Janod. But Sonya calls him a damned bastard and tells him to shut up as she appears ready to slice him with her sword. But we see that she was actually aiming at a monster behind the old man, who was about to devour him, so she tells him to stop whining and help them. However, he runs away and tells her that if she wants to die, then she should do it on her own. Realizing this, Mao calls him a damn coward. The leader reaches the gate and pounds on it, demanding that they open it. Suddenly, to his surprise, it opens, and on the other side, he encounters Jocko Gusto. This surprises the entire group and makes Sonya burst into tears at seeing him alive after all. However, the leader observes him angrily and grabs his arm, blaming him for everything, as he made Janod attack their village. He asks him if he knows how much trouble they've been through because of what he did. Troubles that could have been avoided if he had just left Janod's lair alone. But Jocko doesn't respond, and instead of speaking, he trembles as strange veins begin to appear on his neck. Suddenly, he turns around, roaring with red eyes and a monstrous mouth, ready to bite the old man. Those who didn't see the threat coming, and Jocko manages to bite him in the neck, knocking him down and leaving everyone stunned. Jocko bites and tears with force, while the terrified leader asks what's happening to him. Blood begins to splatter everywhere until the old man's struggles finally stop, indicating his death. Paralyzed, the group doesn't understand what's happening to Jocko, who continues devouring the old man in front of them. And when he turns around, they see a corrupt and deformed version of their once friend. Taishan warns them that he was infected by Janod and is no longer the same person they once knew. As he stands up, Sonya refuses to believe it's true. Then we see the girl's memories, where Jocko extends his hand and tells her that he's searching for a cure for the fish disease. There must be a cure for the children somewhere in that world, and he asks Sonya to go with him. She explains that she's a mercenary, and her fee is not cheap either, but he tells her that she and Gongti can take anything they find during their dives. She asks if he's serious, and he affirms that he is, throwing her a small, adorable keychain as proof. Gongti asks if that's the only memento he has of his daughter. With a warm smile, he answers yes and tells Sonya to do something that makes a difference. This convinces the girl, and she accepts his contract. So, at the end of the memories, we see her shedding tears non-stop for him. The former adventurer stumbles toward them, and Sonya tries to reason with him, asking if he remembers her. Mao tries to stop her, telling her it's not safe, but she pushes his hand away and tells him to let go. And she reminds her friend that he said he would find a cure for the children, so he must wake up. This seems to stop Jocko, who starts trembling and collapses while groaning and holding his head in pain. But then he screams, and we see his suit exploding as his body expands, now turning into a monster with tentacles and purple skin. Immediately, he lunges at Sonya and bites her arm. Desperately, she screams his name and begs him to stop, but the monstrous man doesn't cease biting no matter how much she pleads, until he tears off a piece of flesh, making her scream in pain. Then Kana appears, cutting off one of his arms, causing him to scream as well. Gongti also shows up and rushes to attack the monster, but she stops him and tells him not to do it. She explains that it's not a monster but Jocko Gusto, which makes the harpooner pause and look at his face. He asks if what he sees in front of him is him, while wondering why this happened. Suddenly, Jocko is impaled through the chest by Kana's sword, causing a torrent of blood to spray toward the harpooners. And that's how the third part of this manhwa ends. If you have made it this far in the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to get here, so comment the word Leviathan in the comments. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.